You know what's crazy? 80% of you watching this podcast have not subscribed to my channel. Please press the subscribe button to support my and my team's hard work. I mean, generally the way this works is it just starts rolling. You don't even realize when the conversation started. But Arsh, I'll give you a little background on why this conversation is so interesting for me. I'd asked my team, I said, listen, now that we've rebranded and I want to go in a different direction with what I'm doing, I want to have conversations that sort of stimulate my mind.
Definitely.
Find me an archaeologist, somebody who's done archaeology, somebody who's dug up a few places, somebody with some idea of, the world and its history. And they gave me just the most staggering curriculum vitae I've ever seen in my life. Like, it's pages long, brother. I've had guys from all walks of life, very successful, very intelligent, all types of people. Nobody has a CV this long with so many accolades, just so many languages that you've learned, so many disciplines you've studied. It's almost like you're boy genius. It's almost like you're Sheldon Cooper. Is that a fair description of you?
Well, actually, yes and a no. But so kind of you.
Yeah. No, I mean it. Tell me more about what your history in education and such is.
Well, actually, I was born in a city that is famous for its learning, the city of Allahabad, or Prayagraj as it has been named. The ancient name is Prayag. And of course, it's also known as the city of the prime ministers. 7 prime ministers either were born in Allahabad or have connections to Allahabad. It was called the Oxford of India by the British. And you are born in such a Sangam city. Your family too, it's a Sangam of cultures and religions. Because one part of my family is Muslim and the other part is Sikh, Hindu. So you have a concoction of cultures and languages and religions and faiths and customs and rituals. And you are intrigued, if you have a curious mind, that what is it all about? You try to discern the historical narrations behind those rituals, the ideas that are entailed in those rituals, the languages those people use, the food, and of course, to add a very candid confession that it is very lucky because whenever or any festival comes in, you always get a pocket note of money. That's called shagun in some of the places. It's a different milieu. You are born in a Sangam city, you have too much of intellectual fervor going on amongst the people. Books are being discussed, even in my family. And despite the fact that none of my family members were or are into history or archaeology, it was history that acted as a common thread between these different narrations. And of course, we even changed cities. So one half of my schooling was in Allahabad, the other half was in Lucknow. So it's a tale of 2 cities. One city where there's an intellectual fervor, so to speak, in Allahabad or Prayag. The other city has its charms of Nawabi culture, of Mausiki, that is music, or Rakasi, that is dance, of poetry, the food not to miss, and of course the charms of having people around you, the Sham-e-Awadh, as people say. So it was a concoction, if I can rectify. And of course, when you have almost half a dozen languages as your mother tongue or your father tongue, you aren't tied to a single monotonous way of living or way of thinking. You're always full of ideas, or rather you accept ideas, you discern new ideas, and you love to learn more than life or your family has to offer. And one of the first languages that I learned was actually ancient Egyptian. It was just when I was in class 2 that I started learning ancient Egyptian myself.
The hieroglyphs?
The hieroglyph script, yes.
Right.
And it was out of a sheer excitement that came in when my mother bought a book for me. It was on ancient Egypt. And it was a wonderful, beautiful one because it was a flip open book. So you see a monument on a page and then you flip it and you see the inside of the monument. That was the whole idea about that book. Wonderful, beautiful one. I still have it. And I started looking at the symbols, the hieroglyphic script. You have more than 800 symbols in hieroglyphic script. You have very different ways of using it. And it's one of the few scripts that use pictures for writing language. Even the Harappan script, so some scholars say that it's pictorial or logographic. Even Chinese is derived from a pictorial script. The cuneiform script of Mesopotamia itself was a pictorial script, what we call as proto-cuneiform. I started learning it myself from Google. It was a new entity that came in 2006, 7, 8. And I instantly learned the symbols, the fundamentals, the basic symbols that you have to memorize. And I remember that had a dead animal outside the gates of my house. It was a mouse. And I tried mummifying it using the common kitchen salt that we have. A sort of emulation of the ancient Egyptians, at how they would mummify it using salt, because that was a word I read in the book. Not knowing that it's a different salt. The Egyptians use a different one called natron, and it has a different chemical composition. It's just a 7-year-old kid with his antiquarian curiosity.
You probably made the house stink up.
A lot number of times.
Yeah.
Yes. And the successful one was absolutely covered later on by the media, by experts. It was a fish from one of our aquariums, and it died naturally. I named it Snow White because of the fact that it turned white when we sort of tried to mummify it using natron. The natron I had to prepare myself in my home laboratory because it's a very compact combination of sodium carbonate, bicarbonate, and a little bit of sodium chloride in 3:2:1 ratio. It's
You're Dexter, bro. You're Dexter.
Different from kitchen salt.
That's so crazy.
And Snow White still lives on as a corpse, or what the ancient Egyptians would rather say, as a living ancestor. It's still there, no stinking, nothing, because we even used, as the ancient Egyptians did, incense in mummifying the body. The Egyptians had natron, that is the salt, in a natural form. It's natron and natron. It was a part of the Tethite Sea in prehistoric times. In India, you don't have a salt of that composition that takes and scoops out the moisture from the bodies.
Interesting.
That's the difference.
There's so many threads I want to pull through. So just allow me a moment. First of all, super interesting. I think people will not get this from just looking at you on the camera or hearing your voice or the way you talk, because frankly, the way you talk is 200 years old, not 25 years old. You're 24? Like you're very articulate
I have
way of
no
talking.
wish to get myself to an older age
Very
now.
quickly.
Yes.
Yeah, right. You're only 24.
Yes.
You are a student of 22 languages, you said.
Yes, a student.
A student.
Yes.
You insist on that, but how many of those languages are Indian and how many of those are foreign?
Well, lot number of them are Indian, and that too number of them are ancient Indian. Nobody speaks them now. Tamil I learned from, of course, the pronunciation of the word itself was taken for granted by the people from South India when they heard me speaking in Tamil, because I was invited to IIIT Tiruchirappalli. And there I spoke a word or paragraph or two in Tamil. So they took me as a Tamil speaker. I learned it from one of my housemates. She was from Tamil Nadu. She used to work in Delhi, no more now. But during COVID, I learned Tamil from her. Sanskrit, long time back. Even did a Shastri in Sanskrit with the Shukla Yajurved as the specialized subject. Arabic, Persian, Urdu, Kashmiri, Punjabi, Hindi, of course, what we call as Hindustani, the typical mixture of Hindi and Urdu. Pre-47. And of course, Pali I'm learning right now, so to speak, from the Indian side.
What are the other ones?
Well, French, Ancient Egyptian. Ancient Egyptian itself is of three types. So you have Old Ancient Egyptian, you have Middle Ancient Egyptian, and you have Greco-Roman Ancient Egyptian. So there are three variants of the language. Prakrit, of course, in India, it's what you speak as a Jaina tongue. The Ardh Magadhi is actually the exact word. That variant of Prakrit that Mahavir Bhagwan used for his sermons, and what is the language in the earliest Jaina corpus of literature. And you go on, and you have the concoctions as well. For instance, you have languages like Brahui, which is now spoken in the northwestern part of the Indian subcontinent in the Balochistan region. It's a mixture, so to speak, of the Dravidian tongues and Persian tone. So
show me how that sounds like. Can you say something?
Yes, it's like something like ettu veto kharast. So you have the first word and the second little bit of the retroflexes, that is the murdhanya, the ta-ta-da-da-na, typically Dravidian tongue, and then you have the Persian word, the sweet, the smooth dentals.
Okay, what else? Keep going. This is so interesting. What else do you speak?
It's very interesting that even French, for instance, I learned French using Sanskrit. It's such a language. It's a wonder. As a student of the 21st century India, would not hesitate to say that Sanskrit is a marvelous entity. It's a language that is ingrained in logic. I would not say just science, but also logic. For instance, if you learn French for the first time, word for orange is spelled the same way as in English. So if I ask you what's the spelling of orange in French, you would say Orange. And an English speaker would speak it as
Orange.
Orange.
Right.
But in French is orange.
Orange. Or something, huh?
Yeah, orange, the same thing.
Orange.
Now, for a speaker of English, it's very problematic.
Yeah, what the hell?
But when you are a Sanskrit student, you have a concept what's called the Varna Vichhed, that is dividing a word into its constituent aksharas, that is swarn and the swar and the vyanjan, the noun, the consonants and the vowels. And you have the halant, signifying the half of the sound, as in consonants. So you have the u, chote u wala, plus the o with the chandra bindu, signifying the nasal, o, the r,
Right.
right? And then the visarg after the r. So you have the wound. Now, this is a way of, it's a mnemonic, it's a way of remembering the correct pronunciation. And you can even ask your French teacher, is it orange or is it orange? There's a difference. There's a difference between the o and a ow. And there's even a sound which you find in Tamil but not in Sanskrit, which is somewhere, even in Pali, which is somewhere between the o and the ow. There's a o. The same sound that comes when you recite the om. And of course, if you are a player of guitar, you know about the strings.
Right.
And if you plug the string in the middle, you have a sort of an average of the two sounds that can possibly be produced by the two ends of the string. Now, when you say om, it's actually consisting of three fundamental swaras. The a, the u, and the ma. But the logic is that when you recite from a to u in a very slow way, it's ow. So the o is actually the mean between the two sounds.
The a and the u, the mean is o.
That is actually a concept what we use in Varn Sandhi, this Sandhi, what we say as the combination of sounds to produce new ones. Sort of like speaking about combining words together to produce single sentences without a need to sort of pause or stop in between. And again, when you speak very slowly, the letters from A to A, it's actually A, from A to E, it's from I. The A comes in between.
Yeah.
You don't have that in any other language.
So, wait, are you saying that the way, and I realized this, I don't know, when I was a little kid, because I was playing with the Hindi alphabet. And k, kh, g, g is all from here,
Yes.
and then you, ch, 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 and
Yes.
all the way till the point you're at p, ph, b, b, which is all oral from
Yes,
the lips,
yes,
right?
yes.
Are you saying basically that the way Sanskrit, or for that matter Devanagari, the script, or Sanskrit, the language is organized, is that what you say is what you write, and therefore you can, like, it's logical in that way? Or did I completely miss the point?
Even more than that, you're completely right. And even more than that, because something you write has a definite way of speaking. It's not something like in English where we have the silence.
Yes, right.
The P of psychology is silent.
Right.
The knife of the K of knife is silent. DOOR is door, but POOR is poor.
Right.
So the child will get a thrashing from the kindergarten teacher that why don't you speak POOR as poor? And why are you speaking as that poor? Because the child is very rational in his mind, the younger ones. And they do have a logic that if it is DOOR door, then POR would be poor.
Right.
But English has this inconsistency, which you don't find, or rather, most of the languages have those inconsistencies which you don't find in Sanskrit, because it's all based on formula. And you spoke about ka, kha, ga, ga, nga, cha, cha, ja, ja, nya, ta, tha, da, da, na, ta, tha, tha, da, da, na, pa, pha, bha, ba, ma. Now, it follows that Sanskrit, it by itself is the only language, indeed, that has the alphabets arranged as per the human anatomical arrangement of the parts. It's actually the sound, the air coming in from the lungs into your throat, and the first place the sound, either the tongue or rather the air touches is actually the guttural, the kanthe, ka, kha, ga, ga, nga, all the way going till pa, pha, ba, ba, ma.
Yeah, that's crazy.
So, if you are actually in a habit of using Sanskrit or any language that has such complexities of sound, it in fact has a very cognitive effect on your brain, because each of your parts of the vocal cord, or indeed your mouth, are in fact connected to different parts of your brain. So any speaker of English who perhaps would use more of the gutturals, or rather the retroflexes, like tomorrow, it's not tomorrow.
Yeah.
But a speaker of Italian would always use tomorrow if he tries to speak English. A speaker of Spanish would always be using more of the dentals like Traiano, turista, la turista, but never the retroflexes. Now, anyone who doesn't uses much of those sounds, or indeed doesn't touches more about those parts, has that corresponding part of the brain atrophied.
So you just can't say it later on.
You just can't
like
say
you can't
it.
roll your R's.
Yes, or rather, that part of the brain doesn't get stimulated. Sanskrit allows you to have the complexity, and it's such a wonderful language. I can give you a reference, and of course we'll move on to other things. There's one shlok from the Kirat Arjuniam. This is a story about Arjun the Kirat, that is the hunter, by Bharavi. And in the 15th sarga, the 14th shlok, the beauty of Sanskrit is you can use a single alphabet to create a whole sentence that has a definite meaning. It's like a b b b b b b b b c c c c c c, and it has a sense. What the shlok is, what we say in Sanskrit in the terminology is ekaksharam, using one letter or one akshar for creating whole sentences. Na no 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 na 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 no nunno nunno nanunne no na ne na nunna nunnanut. Now it has used only a single letter, which is na. And what does it mean? It actually is a dialogue between Arjun and the Gana of Shiva, who are going to fight with each other, rather on the broil of fighting each other, because Arjun is doing penance to gain hold of the Pashupatastra, the astra from Shiva, while he's doing penance in the Himalayas. And he's telling the Ganas that, look, it has been proven time and again that people who actually, are stronger than the others shouldn't attack the weaker ones. And nor does it implies that people who are weak should be exploited by those who are stronger. So it's both ways.
Right.
Even if someone whose leader has not been defeated, but the follower has been defeated, doesn't mean that the follower is defeated unless and until the leader is defeated himself or herself. And it goes on. And you have no consonance between the meaning that I'm telling you and this no.
That's so wild.
The variety of words or vocabulary that Sanskrit offers.
I have a friend who I made in New York. And he's very interested in languages himself. Speaks Arabic, speaks Urdu, speaks Hindi, speaks Hindustani, speaks Punjabi. And he was telling me that he found it super unique that, say, for instance, the word camel or the word hunger has many different words that denote specificity to it. So like it could be extreme hunger or little hunger, and they have both got different words in Arabic. And so there's a degree built into different words. Is that true?
Yes, like words, even in Sanskrit, you have that. Kushalam, Sukham, you have degrees.
Right. That's very interesting. Because, this is a Wittgensteinian argument, which is language shapes how you think.
Yes.
And if you're able to think, for instance, between joy, pleasure, happiness, ecstasy, you're able to categorize them separately and not mix them as happy.
There's degree of emphasis.
Right. There's a degree of emphasis. There might be a qualitative difference between these words also.
Yes.
Right. This is a philosopher's job to start asking what is joy versus what is pleasure.
I can even refer to one of the books, How to Read a Book. It's a very wonderful book. Wahan par they talk about coming to terms with the author. So when you read a book, you come to terms with the author. The word that is being used, in what sense is the word being used in that particular work? So it's like coming to terms with the author.
Right.
Is he emphasizing upon too much happiness or too much gloom, too much ecstasy?
Right. Having sort of established your credentials, I wanted this out because you're a young guy and, people might not get the obvious depth from it. I read your CV. I was super impressed. My question is, do you think ancient civilizations had a particular kind of knowledge, spiritual or scientific, that has since been buried to modern society?
Any civilization.
Yeah,
yes.
any civilization.
Yes, it does.
Yeah, for instance?
Well, when we talk about Egypt, you have so much of a continuation of tradition, very much like in India. You have many marvels that you cannot explain. Pyramids is a very good example. Even recently, you've just got some tunnels beneath the pyramids, and we don't know what the shafts were used for. Rather, whether it's a part of the construction, or it was used for construction, or rather there's something else. And it has been intriguing people since millennia, from King Xerxes of Egypt, of Persia, to Napoleon Bonaparte. There's always been people getting intrigued by the wonders of the ancient past. And the same goes for India. Like, for instance, people still cannot make out the utility of certain structures, like the Great Bath at Mohenjo-daro. Whether the Great Bath was a Great Bath at all, or whether it was a reservoir, as they got many of them at Dholavira in later course of excavations. Whether the Leshnik is one of the scholars who said that the harbor, the port at Lothal isn't a port. And many scholars questioned his deductions that no, it's a port, it's a harbor. And now we recently had some studies, paleogeographical studies that showcases that no, there was an ancient channel that connected that particular structure to the main river. So the ways of interpreting certain structures and making a sense out of them has always been a part and parcel of people. And people do have a curiosity about knowing about things, whether it's a painting, whether it's a monument, whether it's a person. Mona Lisa, for instance, the smile of Mona Lisa, or rather let's go to the curse of Tutankhamun.
Yeah.
That why most of the excavators who were a part of the main expedition that disclosed, or rather discovered, the tomb of Tutankhamun died mysterious deaths, including Lord Carnarvon, who was a main sort of benefactor of the excavation, and Howard Carter, whose cannery was sort of engulfed by a snake, the Egyptian cobra, the symbol of the gods, the same cobra that appeared on the sealed entrance of the tomb of Tutankhamun when they entered secretly on the 24th or 26th of November 1922. Before the authorities could see the tomb, they entered themselves, and there was a sort of a passage that said that whoever shall enter the tomb, death shall come on wings with the spirits and the cobras and so on and so forth. And it happened. So you cannot explain many things, and you can explain a lot of things.
Yeah, I mean, the elephant in the room with Egypt is always how were the pyramids built?
Yes.
Right? Because there seems to be no straight answer to that question.
Well, there are people who have tried to answer those questions, specifically talking about the pyramids and who constructed them. There have been discovered tombs of certain people, perhaps workers who constructed or were a part of the construction process of the pyramids, and they were found not very far from the pyramids themselves. And even the osteological analysis of the bones of those people, because they were poor and therefore they couldn't afford a mummification procedure. You have the bones and you have the osteological analysis of the bones, and you have a lot of fractures, a lot of,
Wear
and tear, because possibly of physical activity,
yes.
the stress that they were a part of. So, of course, you have certain people, of certain archaeologists, certain Egyptologists, most of them the mainstream, saying that no, they were constructed by the people. Some say aliens possibly came in and helped the people constructing the pyramids, and the Sphinx actually is a sort of a testimony to that alien-human collaboration. But then what matters is that certain things do have a capacity to keep people, indulged in speculations. And that is something very intriguing, because nowadays, most of the people do not have a capacity to make someone engaged with them for too long.
Yeah. We live in the era of what sounds right, not what is right.
Well, we live in the era of non-curious onlookers, recipients of manufactured
narratives,
arguments and narratives.
Sure, yeah. So what sounds right? And actually, to that effect, there was a solid debate on Israel and Palestine on Rogan's podcast. I don't know if you came across, Twitter was abuzz with this, between Dave Smith and Douglas Murray. And my analysis of it is basically that. Now we are aesthetic creatures because we don't have the time to absorb depth. Right. So whatever sounds right to us with my worldview, that's all I hear. Yes. The same debate was heard by two different sets of people in completely different ways, but regardless of the point. So do you seriously entertain the possibility of aliens building the pyramids? You yourself as a scholar.
Well, actually, I'm just waiting for an alien to send me an Instagram hi. Until that time, I suppose no. But then we also cannot say that things have to be the way we see it. They can be, we talk about probabilities in mathematics. There's always a 1% chance of the other way around. You cannot deny it. But as for now, for the evidence that we have, it seems more like it was a work of human collaboration rather than an alien Egyptian MOUs being signed.
Sure.
Beneath the Sphinx at pyramids would be joint collaboration.
Right, but isn't there a mechanical obstacle to building the pyramids? So my understanding is that the archaeological consensus on dating the pyramids is 5,000 years ago, 4,500
yes,
years.
4,000, 5,000 years.
Yeah, right.
Yes,
4,000 to 5,000.
Very, very, very systematically.
Right.
Yes.
And during that time, one of the concerns that skeptics raise is that we don't necessarily have the tools or we don't have the logistics sorted for building such strong, tall, like each of those blocks is how many tons and how was it being dragged across and placed on top of each other. And this is not even to say of the complexity that the pyramid naturally includes a pi constant in its build up and there's a golden ratio, this Fibonacci sequence happening.
Yes.
So leaving that sort of conspiracy side, how are the mechanics of this managed? What's the consensual theory on that?
Well, actually, first of all, it's a matter to recognize the human endeavor and the limits of human endeavor. Human endeavor is limitless, Thaan li to karke dikhayenge is actually something that has been going on in the human DNA since we came out of Africa and even before that. The instinct to survive is something that is a part and parcel of the entire human kingdom, animal kingdom, the plant kingdom even. It's a survival of the fittest.
It's the
Natural
biological
selection.
urge that makes atoms into
Yes.
cells. Right.
But then human is more than that. He's a rational being. He has a mind that looks beyond what seems animate, what seems obvious. And he wants to change his surroundings to suit his or her sort of environment, to suit his or her own desires or ambitions. And we have had people since thousands of years who have been a part of such constructions of marvelous engineering feats. When we talk about the ziggurats of Mesopotamia, and even before that, the Stonehenge of England, or even Çatalhöyük, or rather Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, the Great Wall of China. And even later on in India, you had lot of architectural marvels. When we talk about the theory that says that there was a ramp that was constructed around the pyramids when it was being constructed, there was even a ramp that was used for constructing the Brihadeswara temple in Tanjavur. And there is still a village that is like 5 kilometers away from the temple, Charupalam, which means the village of the incline. The memory persists that there was an incline that started all the way from that point up till to the top of the Brihadeswara Vimana for the cupola to be placed all the way to the top. So ramps have been used, and of course the Egyptians, when we talk about the old kingdom, they were technologically very advanced. They had tools, simple tools, but durable ones. And of course, they weren't slaves. They were farmers and peasants who worked for a part of the year when their fields were submerged in the Nile floods that came in annually. So what to do, how to pay the taxes to the king? You work for the king. And a very similar sort of that way of paying off the taxes to the king in the form of forced labor was vetti, a tax that we come across in the Tamil inscriptions from the Chola kingdom. So it's always a common thread that we see around across ages, across countries, across millennia.
But we don't understand exactly why these pyramids were built.
But they were tombs, but
pretty grand for tombs, no? You don't see that scale, that time scale.
No, we do find.
5,000 years ago?
Yeah, not 5,000 years ago, but at least 2,000, 3,000 years ago. In other parts of the world, you had huge mounds that were being constructed in Central Asia by the Scythians. Even as recent as 1500 or 1400 CE, you had these Maidom tombs being constructed in Assam that has recently been enlisted as a World Heritage Site by UNESCO. So the grandeur, Taj Mahal itself is a monument. It's a mausoleum for one of the queens of Shah Jahan. The way by which speculations can come in actually can throw in more of hypothesis, and we cannot deny the hypothesis, but we have to be sure that agreeing or disagreeing with hypothesis has to be based on rationality. It has to be based on a very sound analysis of the sources that we have. Unless until we don't get a UFO being buried somewhere near the pyramids and, opening the UFO, you find the plans of the pyramids, perhaps pointing that they were the architects of the pyramids who possibly got crashed in the sands. We cannot be sure about things.
No, alien smuggling is interesting when you study sort of pre-modern history, because so much of the stuff... See, you study history with calcified remains, with fossils, right? With what is left. A lot of it is gone.
Yes.
And when you do that, a lot of holes exist. And the temptation to smuggle in aliens is very charming. I understand that.
And that
I don't
came in
rule it
after
out.
this ancient alien series that came in, I suppose. It got a fervor in India.
You
after
mean
that.
the Graham Hancock stuff?
Oh, yes.
Or
yes.
even the one before that on History Channel.
Yes, History
right.
Channel.
No, yeah. And I think it's ripe for it. No, it's ripe for entertainment.
Yes.
Guessing with no consequences, but with so much consequence, right? Like, what if aliens are real? It's such a great question. So I entertain myself with it. I don't discard it.
It's good for the brain. It stimulates your brain. It makes you realize the possibilities of...
Precisely.
Yes,
and
I
mathematically,
think so.
I won't rule that possibility out until I find evidence to the
There's a
contrary.
1%
So yeah, I'll give it a whatever fair share.
Yes.
But is it still not... I think the mystery around the pyramids grips populations at large.
Yes.
And it's probably because we don't necessarily understand how the mechanics of it operated, what the purpose of it was, how have they survived all this while, why are so many ancient megalithic monuments all shaped like pyramids?
Yes.
Have you seen that image of Kailash Parvat and like one side of it looks like almost a pyramid shape?
Pyramid shape, yes.
Why is that the case?
Well, I think that it has something to do with the geometry of the shape. The pyramid itself, as claimed by some people, the shape itself has certain ways of sort of focusing the powers of the four directions together at a single vertex, as some people claim. But then we also have to realize that there aren't only 3 pyramids in Egypt. You have more than 200 pyramids all over Egypt, belonging to different kings, belonging to different dynasties, belonging to different people. And you have documentary evidence in the form of inscriptions inside the pyramids or inside the funerary temples that were attached to those pyramids, telling you about who constructed it, and he wanted himself to be worshipped after his death by the people, to be remembered by the people. So it's very obvious for all the 194, 196 pyramids that yes, it was constructed by this particular pharaoh, this one was constructed much later by this pharaoh. But when we talk about this hypothesis about the pyramids, it's always a Giza pyramid that comes into the focus. That is the pyramid of Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure. And that possibly began long ago with Herodotus, whom we address as a father of history and some say as a father of lies, who actually was...
Father of lies.
Lies, yes. Basically by the Latin authors who came after him during the Roman Empire. And he was the first one who was amazed by the pyramids of Giza. So he sort of, speculated that it was possibly constructed by giants. The same theory even went for the Mycenaean Lion Gate in the city of Nos, if I'm not wrong, in the Greek mainland. So even that was said that it was constructed by giants. It adds charm to history. It makes us realize that history is more than what meets the eye. It's more than that.
There is also uncountable amounts of pyramids buried underneath the Amazon rain at the forest cover.
Yes, Central America.
And I was reading about some of Mexico's developmental goals when it comes to railways and such, and they're trying to connect cities. And it's so difficult to locate those pyramids, even using technologies like LiDAR, that at this point they're like, whatever you find in the way, just break, let's just go with it. They have so much heritage that's just under forest cover that they will not even uncover, probably even destroy in an attempt to build a railroad.
Since centuries.
Yeah, for centuries, for millennia probably, right? Like, we don't necessarily understand, even those pyramids, we don't understand. I've actually been to some of the Mexican pyramids, and they're a very interesting sight.
Teotihuacan.
Yeah, Teotihuacan. Yes, they're extremely large. Like, a picture just does not do justice to how broad the base of that pyramid is.
Yes.
And they were used for monumental purposes too. Sacrifice.
And I love the best part, taking in the beating heart, as the Aztecs did, from the sacrificed human victim on the top of the pyramid and offering it to the sun god Huitzilopochtli, Inti in the Incas.
Right.
Wonderful.
Very artistic, huh?
Yes. And the Mayans were the first people who started constructing pyramids even the Olmecs of Central America and the Yucatan Peninsula, or this Yucatan area, they started constructing smaller pyramids. Aztecs constructed magnificent pyramids. The Incas of South America even had pyramids, but very small ones. They preferred more of the temple sites.
But bro, so do you discard the idea that ancient civilizations had ancient technology, which might be very different and in some possible ways even more advanced than modern technology,
And lost.
and then lost it? Do you think that is a fair assessment, or do you think that's also adding charm to history?
No, I think it's a fair assessment. There are certain things that remain unanswered, even as recent as the medieval times in India, that how did they manage to construct such things, and that too in very precise ways, the minds that were behind the same thing, the minds behind a language like Sanskrit, it was a similar mind that perhaps was or is behind those ancient marvels and technologies. The way is to discover that adds charm to history. Well, there are stories of ancient libraries, like the Library of Alexandria got lost. The
Takshila
University, Nalanda, the Ratnagiri, you had 3 stories of libraries destroyed. You had the Bayt al-Hikmah in Baghdad destroyed. You had the Library of Ephesus destroyed. And you don't know what was embedded in those scrolls and parchments and birch and palm leaves. The millennia, centuries of accumulated knowledge gone forever.
Yeah, what do you make of things like Pushpak Viman and such, or even the description of the Mahabharata battle, and how it's sometimes put parallelly to use of nuclear weapon and sort of proto-nuclear weapons? And do you see that as mythology and fiction or metaphor, or do you see it as accurate description? Because see, there's a difference. Here's what I'm trying to point out.
Right.
You can do a very logical language. It's still dealing with thought, intellect, abstraction, logic.
Definitely.
Right? Technology is applied logic to build a tool, using which you build a tool, using which you build a tool, using which until you end up with these screens.
Right.
Right? And so technology is a derivative that compounds on itself as opposed to first principle application
It's a
of
cumulative
logic.
process.
Right. So what I'm trying to ask is, we can for sure say they had logic which was very different from ours and therefore probably much more advanced in certain ways. Did they have technology? Do we have archaeological remains that talk about that signal technology? One more thing, there is this particular temple I remember actually watching on Ancient Alien somewhere in South India, where it's like carved into one rock, one piece, single carving.
The Kailashnath temple at Ellora.
And they don't have any of the rocks that were carved anywhere in the vicinity.
Yes.
So all these are symptoms and signals of the question. Was there ancient technology that we don't know of? And how do you comment on that?
Well, of course, the question itself has 3 parts. So I would go one and one with them. The first is related to the Mahabharata. Now, Mahabharata itself, or the Ramayana, for instance, or even let's go to the other part of the world, that the Greek world that has the Iliad and the Odyssey of Homer. So one of the first archaeologists, Heinrich Schliemann, from that part of the world, was actually intrigued after reading the Iliad and the Odyssey. He discovered Troy, what so to speak is called Troy, and he was able to discover some other sites of the Mycenaeans and the Minoan civilizations in the Aegean Sea on the basis of what he read in the Iliad and the Odyssey. You have 3 traditions. Even the same goes for the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. One is a historical way of looking at it. One is an archaeological way of looking at it. And one that most of the people do miss it is a poetic way of looking at it. Because at the end of the day, both works are magnificent, beautiful, myriad works of poetry. Now let's come to the poetic world first. The Mahabharata or the Ramayana, actually what most people miss, is actually a part of a tradition called the Itihasa tradition. Itihas is different from Puran. The Puran that we have, especially talking about the 18 Mahapurans, is talking about times that are before the composers. बहुत पहले हुआ, पुराने समय में हुआ, times immemorial.
Right.
So you have king lists, lists of lineages of gods and sages and kings, Vansh, Anucharit and the Vansh. You have the Sarg and the Pratisarg, stories about the creation and the destruction and recreation of the world in the Puranas. Itihas is more contemporary. And even Ramayana is a Mahakavya. It has been referred by some authors, even Valmiki himself admits that it's a Mahakavya. Kavya itself means poetry. It's a work of emphasis on the poetical quality of actors and situations and the whole plot. Now, Aristotle says in one of his works, the Poetics,
Okay.
that plot is a single thread that wounds the whole narration together. The rest is narrative. All the other things are episodes. So when we come to the plot of the Mahabharata, it's actually a feud between two sets of warring cousins. And you have certain stories, and even you have the Jaya, the Bharata and the Mahabharata. There's also a very complicated story behind this, that the original composition was merely of 8,800 verses. That was called Jaya Geet. Later on, it was expanded to 24,000 verses. That came to be called Bharata. The story of the Bharata clan or the Bharata tribe.
Sure.
One of the tribes also mentioned in the Rig Veda, especially talking about kings and the fighting of the Bharatas and the Purus.
Which is where the name Bharat comes from.
Bharat is also the name of the king. Bharat is different, is a character from the Ramayana.
Right.
Bharat actually was the son of Shakuntala and Dushyant. And he became a Chakravarti, and he conquered all the four corners of the world, as the Mahabharata tells us. And then you had the Mahabharata, a 1 lakh composition
4x. Right.
of that original Jaya, which was composed and expanded to include stories of the Yadus, from whom Krishna belonged.
Yes.
Other tribes, the Gandharas, Shakuni and Gandhari were from Gandhara, Madri, Madra, including stories from modern day Jaipur, that was ancient Matsya, the kingdom of Virat, where the Pandavas took refuge during their exile incognito, and including all these stories. So there's even a tradition that tells you in the traditional way that the epic was expanded and then it was composed and it was compiled across centuries. And you even have recensions, you have versions of the Mahabharata, different versions of the Mahabharata. The critical edition of the Mahabharata was prepared in 1919 by V.S. Suktankar of the Bhandakar Institute in Pune. And what he did was he collected different manuscriptic versions of the Mahabharata, tried to find out what were the common verses in most of the manuscripts that he took as a core and was a part of the critical edition. The variations he hypotheticated that perhaps they were a result of later interpolations that came in because of regional variations, and unko bhi unhone appendix mein add kiya as part of the indices, coming into 14-volume whole corpus called the critical edition of the Mahabharata. And there also came a critical edition of the Ramayana. So even the story of composition continues until the 20th century, what we now know as a critical edition. When we come to the epic itself, the epic starts with the Sarp Satra, the snake sacrifice, which was being conducted by a king called Janamjay, who was a great-grandson of Arjun, son of a king called Parikshit, the first one who was crowned after the end of the Bharata war or the Kurukshetra war. And he was performing the sacrifice because his father was bitten by one of the snakes called Takshak, which itself is because of a reason that Takshak went in for a hunt, Parikshit went in for a hunt, and he was, filled with, he quenched for water, he was thirsty. So he saw a mendicant sitting and meditating. He asked the sage for some water. The sage was very much in meditation. He couldn't hear that Parikshit was begging, or rather asking, requesting for some water. And Parikshit, out of his rage, had dead snake. He saw a dead snake nearby, wounded round the neck of the sage. The sage's disciple who saw this was infuriated. He cursed him that in 7 days' time you will be killed by a snake. And the curse took its whole course.
Yeah, right.
So Janamjay, his successor, was performing this sacrifice for the entire snakes of the entire cosmos to be sort of destroyed in the sacrificial pit. And then there comes a man whose name was Astik, who said, "What are you doing?" So he said, "I'm doing what is dharma, that my father was killed by a snake, and so I'm taking my revenge." So Astik says, "It is not your father's fault. It was actually your great-grandfather Arjun who had destroyed the forest of Khandavprastha for constructing Indraprastha, that he was given a boon by Agni to sort of destroy the entire Khandavprastha forest and thus killing most of the Nagas." And Takshak, the snake who had actually bitten your father Parikshit, was one of those who lost his families in the Khandavprast forest fire.
Right.
So it's a karma in action and reaction and action and reaction. And then Janamjay was intrigued. He said, I don't know that this thing happened. After 6 years, you don't know much of what happened. You haven't taken the wisdom of your ancestors. So let me narrate you something. And then he says all of that. And then Janamjay says, I want to hear more of the stories of the Pandavas and the Kauravas and about Dharma and Adharma and all that. And then Astik says, you should call in Sheikh Vaishampayan, who can narrate you the entire saga, because his guru himself, Vedvyas, was the composer, so to speak, of the story. And thus the story begins as the story of how the Bharatas, the Kuru clan, the Yadu clan, the Puru clan came out, emanated from the ancestors, going all the way to Mercury, that is Budh, being married to a man turned woman named Sadyumn in the masculine form and Ila in the feminine form. And Budh or Mercury himself being cursed by Brihaspati, his foster father, that since you are the biological son of Moon, who got eloped with my wife Tara, and you are the illicit son of that Moon, I curse you that you would neither be male nor female. Now, getting this person married to a person named Sadyumna, a prince who enters into a forest enchanted by Parvati Shiva, that any male that enters a forest would turn female. So the other person is technically both male and female. Sadyumna turning into Ila. And Parvati sort of amending the curse that during the Shukla Paksh of the moon you would be male, during the Krishna Paksh of the moon you would be female. Oh. Both of them marrying, and thus the lineage of the Chandravanshi started.
Whoa.
The place where the progeny of Ila, called the Ela, resided, was Ela Vas. One of the theories about the name of Allahabad is actually the theory that it's a place where Ela, the progeny of Ela, resided, Vas kiya, Ela Vas. Right. That's a poetic version.
Right.
It's very complicated. Not the historical version. Historical version जो हमने आपको बताया, 8,800 Jaya, then 24,000 it was Bharat, and then Mahabharata, 1 lakh verses. And then when you collate it with the archaeological evidence and even the linguistic analysis, you have certain chronologies even within the Mahabharata. Brockington is one of the scholars who actually deduced these chronological layers in the text and the content. That there was an original core, no doubt. And perhaps there was a war that did happen. But on a much smaller scale. Rather infused by the poetic charms and imaginations of bards called Suits, that later on more details became to be embedded in and later became a 1 lakh whole corpus of the Mahabharata that we now know today. So 5 chronological layers. The first was before the 6th century BC. That was more related to the Vedic culture, so to speak, a warring culture of tribes and clans, and women were more independent, likes of Draupadi. And, there were certain customs that were accepted during that time. The custom of niyog, the custom of marrying into more than one partner, polyandrous marriages. And even today, certain tribes of the south, the Nilgiri Toda, still have those customs amongst themselves. So it's not a new deal for India. And then you have a second phase that's after urbanization, the second urbanization, cities coming up. So you have these stories of fantastic palaces in Hastinapur and the charm and the glitter of buildings. The third phase is when Bhagavatism, the Bhakti tradition, comes into the fore, and Krishna is associated with Vishnu as an avatar of Vishnu. The Bhagavad Gita comes into the fore during that time. And you have the concept of Bhakti. And of course, the Bhagavad Gita talks everything about Bhakti and how moksha can be attained using different ways of Gyan Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, Karma Yoga, Raj Yoga.
Right.
And then the fourth tradition was after the end of the modern period and the post-modern period up till the start of the Gupta period. So when caste system was becoming more rigid, the position of women declined. And so you have certain instances where Draupadi's polyandrous marriage was narrated. But you have explanations coming in that there was a boon that Draupadi received in a previous birth from Shiva. A rationalization, an explanation signifying that things weren't common now as it was before. And so there's an explanation being given that why this is the case. The fifth and the last, of course, even Akbar had commissioned the translation of the Mahabharata into Persian called the Razmanama. So even the story of the Mahabharata continues even up till the 16th century. And you have this historical chronology. Archaeology is absolutely silent about the Mahabharata, but we do have a pottery which is called the painted graveware that has been recovered from most of the sites that have been named in the Mahabharata. The first was Hastinapur, that was excavated by one of my gurus, Professor B.B. Lal, who is no more, in 1951-52. So that was the first place where the PGW ware was discovered rather, or identified, and it was said that since most of the sites where the PGW is being found,
PGW?
Painted grey ware is actually a very beautiful ware. It's grey in color with black strokes and
what
designs.
What does one look at? PGW? Is that?
Oh, yes, if you can.
Yeah,
if you can.
PGW. Anything you want pulled up by the way.
PGW, yes,
Yeah.
PGW. So that pottery actually has been used as an indicator of grey ware.
Huh.
Has been used as an indicator. This one, yes. And even you can use the map, the second one. So you see the first site is Hastinapur, Chhatra, Jakera, Panipat, Indraprasth, Delhi, Mathura, Bairat. Bairat is actually the ancient Matsya kingdom where the Pandavas had sort of taken refuge in their incognito exile. So you see even Kaushambi, my place. And all of these places are mentioned in the Mahabharata. When we talk about Kaushambi, when B.B. Lal was excavating Hastinapur in 1951,
right,
he encountered that after the PGW layer, the layer or the strata of the soil where the PGW was found, there was a huge flooding of the Ganga.
Whoa.
And you find the starting of the occupation in Kaushambi around the same time. And you have a reference in the Matsya Puran and the Vayu Puran that the fifth king from Parikshit, whose name was Nichakshu, was a king of Hastinapur. And after the flooding of the Ganges and Hastinapur got drowned and submerged, he shifted his capital from Hastinapur to Kaushambi.
Wow.
So sort of there's a consonance between textual evidence and archaeological evidence.
Right.
So you have so much of dimensions of seeing. You know, there's a concept among the Jaina philosophers, the concept of Saptabhangi, Shyadvad, अनेकांतवाद, दैट क्योंकि महावीर भगवान ने बोला कि भाई सत्य का पालन करो, झूठ नहीं बोलना. अब किसी ने पूछ लिया भगवान है कि नहीं. अब इसका अगर हमने जवाब दिया है और मान लो नहीं है तो झूठ हो गया.
सही बात.
और बोले कि नहीं है और पता चला हो गया तो वो भी झूठ हो गया. तो बेटर इज टू हैव अ 7-pointer अप्रोच टू अ पर्टिकुलर रियलिटी. सो यू हैव at least 7 dimensions of looking at reality. That's called Shyadvad. ऐसा हो भी सकता है, नहीं भी हो सकता, शायद है लेकिन नहीं है, लेकिन है तो है. That's actually a way of putting it out. Shyadvad or Anekantvad or Saptabhangi.
I'm going to use this. Anytime somebody asks me a question, I'm like, listen.
Definitely.
And then I lay out 1 layer, 2 layer, 3 layer, 4 layer, 5 layer.
Yes.
And that's because it's not as black or white. I'm going to arrive at it slowly. I'm going to draw lines to the point. I want to make sure I caveat away things that you might think in this process. Like answering a question, and you know, I'm in the business of asking questions. So I'm telling you, all questions, most questions are very open-ended. They're usually coming in with some intent that the other person's asking, and you need to play with all parties, the listeners, the asker, yourself, the truth.
Yes.
And so I really like that, Saptabhangi.
And even as a student of law, we use it in our own day-to-day dealings.
Right.
It's a part of psychoanalysis of seeing the clients and of course who is the wrong and the right party, and then you have to sort of approach the judge and sort of convince him about your case. So even in that case, it helps with psychoanalysis.
Sure.
It's a very good Sigmund Freudian way of sort of studying about psychology.
I also really like the way you sort of delineated that there's a textual resource, there's archaeological resource and poetic. And I agree because it would seem that Mahabharata and Ramayana were written as poetry. Correct me wherever I'm wrong. I don't want to get the details.
And even Aristotle says in his Poetics that the extent of standards of poetry are different from politics. So works of fiction, if it is fiction, is different in standard compared to works of expository nature.
Yes.
So you cannot actually, as most of the historians do, and very sorry to say that you judge all the texts as per a single narrative or perspective. We have to be sensitive to the genre itself, to the variety of that text.
How literal that text is depends on how it was written.
And for whom.
And for whom it was written, for what purpose it was written,
Yes,
right?
the audience.
So you don't take the word to mean the same thing in 2 different texts. Because, I mean, when I say to my to-be wife, मैं तेरे लिए चांद तारे तोड़ लाऊंगा, I'm not being literal about it.
Yes.
Right? I'm being metaphorical about
Unless
it.
you're into NASA.
Unless I'm Elon Musk, you know, unless I am Elon the Musk, right?
Even they are going more into the oceans than the space these days.
And we might find moon rocks in the ocean, so it's not really out of imagination. But, you know, I do understand that. I'm trying to draw you back to the question. And see, I'll tell you why this question exists. if I take a cross section of society, no matter what age, no matter, above a certain socioeconomic background, and if you ask them about ancients versus the moderns, and you'll find several essays for the last 500 years, Western canon, Indian canon, writing about ancients versus the moderns.
Right.
There's a question that emerges about the quality of ancient wisdom and knowledge systems. And I get why that question emerges, because ancient plus survival is also timeless. And what is timeless has stood the test of time, which we don't, and our sort of intuitions probably do not. So I understand the fascination. But the snacky sort of charming question that emerges when you study ancient versus moderns is, did the ancients have technologies that the moderns have forgotten? Because there is ample evidence beyond the text also, like the pyramids, which is a physical unit, like the temple that we were talking about. There are physical units, you look at it and you're like, whoa, I don't know how to do this with all the technology.
How did they manage?
How did you do this? Were things flying? And then you start coming into the text and like, is the Pushpak Mivan?
And there's even an explanation possible that perhaps they had Doraemon with them. And they had the pocket ears. And even some people ask me how it was. I said, I don't have a time machine of Doraemon. I don't have a drawer. I'm not like Nobita. Do I wear the goggles?
Yes, I
and
do.
Even a Shizuka I longed for.
Right. But hey, it's so, you are 24. If you're referencing Doraemon in this conversation. And I think the world is unprepared because the world doesn't understand. Right now, when they think of historians, they think of older men sitting with a stack of books next to them.
With a grimace.
Yeah, right. Talking about all these sincere issues with too much gravity. And then there's 24-year-olds who will be 50-year-olds one day, still reminiscing about their Shizukas and their Doraemons, but talking the same depth. So I think the world's about to change, right? But I mean this seriously though.
Yes.
And tell me if I'm asking a stupid question. That I'm completely fine with. Don't mock me in language I don't understand. Be direct about it. Do we have anything about ancient technology that we might be missing? Some compass discovered somewhere, some algorithmic sort of processor found somewhere. Anything of that nature?
Well, even getting back to the Mahabharata, we have evidence of, or rather, in descriptions of certain weapons being used. Pashupatastra I just mentioned from the mention of Bhirthari's, this Bharavi's Kiratarjunium. Agniastra, Brahmastra, Shivastra, we have different weapons. Right. We really don't know.
We don't know.
But talking about one aspect of that, saying that no, we don't know that whether it existed or not. But then also realizing in a way subconscious note, the minds that were behind those works were in normal minds. If they had sort of described about certain things like these, perhaps if they were not successful, they were at the least capable of devising things like that. And even if it is work of poetry or it was reality, we are not actually in a mood or rather competent to judge at the moment. Perhaps our own level of technology isn't that upgraded.
Sure.
Now, how can we actually standardize ourselves as being the modern against the savage ancients? We are a part and parcel in bone and flesh of those people who sort of roamed around the forest millions of years ago and discovered fire by chance perhaps, or by some thunder, lightning, and they came up with varieties of ways of expressing themselves.
Sure.
And even talking about technology, when we talk about technology, we sometimes forget that technology as a whole is a rather Western modern conception. The concept of science and allied science is something that comes from the West, but it has never been the case in India. In India, Vidya, Gyan, Vigyan, it's all connates. You can use it one for the other, and so there wasn't a clear distinction between technology and science, or applied science, natural science, pure science. Even social science, for that matter, isn't very much different from natural science in the ancient
political
Indian
science is as Vidya as like
Vidya,
physics
it's
is.
Raj Vidya, it's Yantra Vidya, Tantra Vidya, it's Bhugol Vidya, it's
Pranayama, all of that,
and all that, Ayurvidya. The point is that when we talk about ancient technologies, whatever evidence or information that we do have about whatever we know that it was the case, we still have to realize that more than 90% of the manuscripts that we have in our libraries, tagged in manuscripts, in these archives all over the world, have still not been studied, discovered, published, translated, edited, compared.
So you're saying 90% of the existing evidence we have on ancients
The corpus.
is just unread.
And the problem is that most of the people aren't interested into languages, ancient languages.
Just throw it into an artificial intelligence, process it.
Well, the problem is that even if you use AI in that particular matter, and that would be very easy, as many people are doing in sort of digitalizing the manuscripts, you have to use the brain. Because you can encounter a script in a manuscript that you do encounter, even apart from the Harappan script when we talk about India, that are still in ancient unknown scripts. You can't read. And even if you read, you have paleographical problems. That something is written, the same thing is written some cursive way, and the same thing is being written in some other way. So it stands for the same thing, but you cannot read the writing.
It's a handwriting issue.
And then also there are interpolations. For example, there's a manuscript that was written like 2000 years ago. Then some scholars thought of कि नहीं अब ये खराब हो रहा है, खत्म हो रहा है, तो इसको copy कर दो. So they would add a sentence here, a word there, and thus sort of changing the entirety. It's not like 100% change, but
Shape
at least
Theseus.
90% change. There's a change of shape.
Yeah, right.
And then by the time it comes to our times, we don't know whether it was let's come to the Rig Veda. The only version of the Rig Veda that we have today extant is a Shakal recension of the Rig Veda. But we do know from inscriptions, from other references, that there were more than 8 to 9 different recensions or editions or rather versions of the Rig Veda. You had the Shakal, you have the Vashkal, you have the Balkhilya. Even among the other Vedas, among other texts, you had so many versions, most of them lost forever. Yeah. So AI has limitations.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it feeds on the data you give it.
Yes. And we don't know that, perhaps we can come across a manuscript that tells you the nuska of making a Pashupatastra or the Brahmastra. But until and unless we don't know, or rather we haven't found any manuscript, it's a 50-50 thing, it's probability.
I think I was reading about, I may get the name wrong, I think Charit Sahita?
The Charak Samhita.
Charak Samhita,
yes.
Which is written by Sushrut.
Charak.
No, there is...
another one is Sushrut Samhita.
Okay, Sushrut Samhita.
The one with the surgery.
Yeah, right. Where he's talking about surgery, was some of the earliest examples of plastic surgery and such. And I don't know, this was again very cursory reading. It seemed like the article suggested that a lot of this kind of medical text also, where herbs and herbology is used, where like spices and sort of, it's the forest medicine man is still unread mostly. Nobody really knows how to use the forest for
tribal traditional medicine.
Yes, right. And I mean, some of it might be getting passed through oral.
And there was a lady, I suppose, from Tamil Nadu who was awarded the Padma Shri for her knowledge of medicines from the forest. She was a tribal lady, just demised a year or two before. And, they were scholars. They were works which are now lost. Even when we talk about the Ashtadhyaya of Panini, now it is said by historians that it was the first grammar book in India. But Panini himself refers to certain grammarians who existed before him, whose
like
texts are
Brihaspati.
a lot like Brihaspati,
right.
like Indra, like Arishtanemi, like Kapishthal. You have different names.
Wow.
Kathyayan, another one of his works is it's known, but another is lost. Even Dhanvantri in medicine. Dhanvantri has been referred to as a god of medicine. He came out from the Samudra Manthan with the Amrit. But then you also have certain scholars who say that no, Dhanvantri possibly was also a historical figure who was sort of a precursor, rather a forefather, the main big boss of ancient Indian tradition of medicine, who initiated the tradition itself.
Wow.
And Sushrut and Charak themselves were sort of students or per student of Dhanvantri. Wow. And Ayurveda itself was one of the Upavedas that was attached to the Rig Veda. So you have the Vedas and you have certain texts that were attached to the Vedas. The Ayurveda was the Veda that deals with life and medicine was attached to the Rig Veda. The Dhanurved, the art of archery, was attached to the Yajurved. Gandharvved was attached, the art of music was attached to the Samved, because Samved itself is a musical recension of the Rig Veda.
Wow.
A musical version of the Rig Veda. So you have different ways of chanting and sort of singing the Vedas,
right.
The Rig Veda. And then Atharvved had an Veda which is called the Shilpa Shastra, the Shilpa Veda, architecture.
Wow.
And all lost.
No, I do know. I can totally see the same kind of human mind, same kind of curiosity, and if you add sufficient biological conditions, I'm provided for food wise, sex wise. I'm not 3 million years ago in the savannas trying to defend myself, right? The mind will wander. That is understood. And see, technology as in tools, I understand. Technology as in tools may not have existed. There might be chariots, no Teslas. I get that bit. But I'm sure the mind went inwards. I can see totally that the science of the spirit is something the ancients had a grip on way better than probably we do. And modernity has a fogging effect. Modernity has a confusing effect on the spirit. As tools and material, you extend outwards, you look less inwards and so on. And you can therefore make the claim that wars and mental health crises and all these sort of modern phenomena we see are because of a loss of spiritual science. That seems to be the trend because there is a reversion to religion, there is a reversion to spirituality and so on. Having laid that out, I wonder what causes civilizations to forget their power. What are these events?
Well, another reference to the classics. There was a scholar whose name was Edmund Burke. And
is this Heidegger's teacher, Burke?
No. He was a historian.
Okay.
And he wrote a work which is called The Decline and the Fall of the Roman Empire. It's a 3-volume work.
Look up Edmund Burke, please.
Edmund Burke or Edmund... I forgot the surname.
Yeah, just look the title up also.
The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire.
Edward Gibbon.
Edward Gibbon, yes.
Right.
Edward Gibbon.
Right.
So he wrote a work called The History of the Decline and the Fall of the Roman Empire. It was in 3 volumes. And he starts with the age of the Antonines, that is the age of Marcus Aurelius, the enlightened emperors of Rome.
Right.
All the way to the fall of the Roman Empire. And the factors that he has listed, which holds true for every civilization, even Aristotle was one of those people who first came up with ideas about how civilizations come up, have their zenith, the apogee, and then they fall. Even Herodotus had his own estimations about how the Persians sort of emerged, had their apogee, and then declined in his work, The Histories. Was that civilizations have a tendency to be overburdened by their own weight. अपने सिर के बल गिरना, अपने भार के बल गिरना, जिसे हिंदी में कहते हैं. So at one stage, you have people who have ambition, who have survival instincts, who are, sort of hardened, war hardened, who have a way of saying that, dude, I need to be someone, I need to have something, and I have to take it from others. So you can snatch it, take it, whatever, but you need to have something in your hands. So it's actually more of a street fighter situation. So most of the empires that we see in history, whether we talk about the Mauryan Empire, the Mughal Empire, the Roman Empire, the Egyptian civilization, the Harappan civilization, it starts with a point zero. Then there is, out of that confidence that comes in with grabbing things in, of consolidation, of organizing people together for a common cause, creates a sense of vigor towards your goals. And that vigor adds to the charm because you feel you have a superiority complex against other people, that we are here to rule, or rather to claim to rule the whole world, so to speak. So someone becomes Zille Ilahi, the shadow of God. Someone becomes Param Chakravartin. Some people become Maharaja Dhiraj. Some people become Param Bhattarak, Param Bhagavat, Shahanushahi, Devaputra, whatever you can add up, so on and so forth. But then out of that vigor comes an illusion that only you have the capacity to catch hold of that vigor and sustain that vigor, without realizing that you yourself were in a position that you didn't had that vigor before, and you took it using your own hard work, which now you resist doing because you are now in the Air-Shoara. And there the decline starts. So there is an element of absence of retrospection that leads to the decline.
So there's overconfidence.
Overconfidence comes in when you don't retrospect. Hum kahan the aur kahan se aaye is the most important essential thing that needs to be done by either an individual as a human being, a person, a citizen, or as a nation. Where were we when we started our saga, our journey, and where are we now? Before looking at where we are going towards to. So it's actually the lack of retrospection, lack of introspection. Retrospection is looking at the past. Introspection is looking inside ourselves, inwards. And that leads to the decline and the fall.
विनाशकारी
विपरीत बुद्धि तब होती है जब आप विपरीत नहीं देखते कि आप पहले क्या थे.
और आई थिंक रश्मि रथी में एक लाइन है ना, जब नाश मनुज पे आता है पहले विवेक मर जाता है. राइट. No, I think that is profound wisdom, boss.
Yes, and
you can spot it in real life also.
If it same goes with the Mughals, Babur comes in. For instance, he was the first Mughal emperor. He was sort of an invader. Of course, he was an invader because you had the Delhi Sultanate before ruling over the northern parts of India, and it was in decline, the Lodhis. So he was in search of a homeland. He was basically from Samarkand, and he was ousted by those beyks, by Shahbani Khan Uzbek, and he was just wandering around. Then 1494, he took hold of, 1504, he took hold of Kabul. Then 1524, 26 tak he had actually completed like 4 raids into northern India. And then the 5th one, he had won the Battle of Panipat. He was battle-hardened and a scholar. If you read the Babur Nama, the Tuzuke Baburi's autobiography, he was a soldier who was hardened by years of war with those beyks. But he was also a planner of gardens. He wrote poetry, very eclectic, very cultured human being. Knower of languages. He knew Persian, he knew Chagatai Turki, the native language of the Mughals. By the way, the Mughals never spoke Persian as a mother tongue until Akbar came in. It was Chagatai Turki that was the native tongue, and that was used even till the time of Akbar and even later on by the Timurid matriarchs who came in, the women of the harem, the older women folk. And then comes in Humayun, who was like ousted back by Sher Shah out of Hindustan. Then comes in Akbar, who is battle-hardened. Jahangir, by his tastes of paintings and flavors and culture and delicacy, you can't compare with any other emperor, specifically painting. But then battle-hardness is not something a part and parcel of Jahangir. Shah Jahan is more magnificent, even in paintings and monuments, that I am the one, the Zille-Ilahi, the Shahanshah Hindustan, so to speak, monuments ko charm dena. I have the power of constructing marvels like the Taj. Aurangzeb is more like into a battle-hardened man because he was sent by his father all through the Subas. While keeping Dara Shikoh besides him, Shah Jahan had sent Aurangzeb on certain expeditions which battle-hardened him and helped him in his succession wars against Dara Shikoh. And then comes in a fall, where the later Mughals were charmed by the intrigues of dances and music and courtesans and the harem that perhaps they weren't much aware about what's going on around them. To the point that people started calling Muhammad Shah, the emperor of Hindustan, as Muhammad Shah Rangila. And then Nadir Shah comes in and invades Delhi. And then takes back the peacock throne, and the Kohinoor story comes in. And Muhammad Shah is, infructuous.
Yeah, you see this modern sort of phenomena. I don't know if this has ever been part of advice that you got, but when I was a kid, my parents told me, he says, one generation you take out to come out of poverty to set up base. The second generation builds on top and finally becomes wealthy.
Yes.
The risk for the third generation is Rangila.
Yes.
Sharam, masti, music, Gana, Nach, alcohol. And very often you'll find sons of extremely wealthy fathers lose all of that to sort of fun. And so in a way, history finds itself in that microcosm.
Survival, consolidation, and then the doom.
The doom, right? And so it's cyclical in that way.
And why is it so? It is because the kids of those parents who have actually pampered them, the parents hesitate to tell the tales of their struggle to their kids. They feel like pampering the kid is a better option to make him not aware about the struggles that we had, to make not him gloomy and melancholic about what they were before.
Right.
But that diminishes the vigor, because then you don't have any element of doing that. Mujhe ye kaam karna hai, I have to do it in those people.
No, you know what? I'm not convinced. I'll tell you why also. Imagine, I know somebody whose mother had a very traumatic childhood.
Mm-hmm.
Had to work since the age of 11. Had to work door to door, washing dishes. Somebody, this is not Indian, right? Did all of that. Made something out of herself, had money. the only dream or the only sort of relationship non-negotiable she had with her kids was they should not see the pain I've seen. They should not see the rejection I've seen. They should not see how people treated me. That's not good life. And so, out of all that trauma, the mother creates a defense and the kids don't learn that. And within one generation, that knowledge is lost forever. I understand family legacy is not passed down, but I don't blame the mom.
Not at all. Yes.
Right?
It's the kids who are at a loss not to have learned that.
Yeah, I mean,
or appreciate that.
as an ambitious man, I'll work all my life. So whatever was deficient to me in my childhood, my kids don't have to see. And I understand that biological instinct.
Yes.
I gather all the tools as this semi-monkey, semi-human form 3 million years ago to make sure my progeny is protected with the weapons I've put together.
And against the elements.
Right? It's the nest that the bird builds so that the child feels safe. I understand the biological instinct behind it. It's a question, a comedian had asked me once. He said, now that we are successful, our kids will not be from the same sort of deficient background that we were. How do we make sure they're not spoiled? And he asked me because my dad did decently well for himself. So I came provided and I would like to think I turned out fine. But he was asking, this was the sort of conversation we were having. I don't know. I think America is fighting with that question. How to keep this civilizational zenith that it has reached, this sort of influence it has on the modern world alive, because you see the internal battle. You see the rift between the political sides in America and the self-destruction. I wonder if the Chinese laugh at the Americans for what they fight about.
They do.
Yeah, because they're so unfocused. American bureaucracy, government, focused, wants to remain number one. The people are fighting circus battles and pretending they have moral superiority over the world. It's so stupid to look at. The Chinese, I'm sure, are having a blast out of it.
And when speaking about the United States, when we see the ideals for which the forefathers,
The founding fathers
of the American Revolution fought for against the British, the ideals of right to liberty, of life, liberty, pursuit of happiness and property, it's all there in the Declaration of Independence, signed 4th July 1776. The idols were tremendously, outside the known human sphere at that time.
Sure.
The land of immigrants, as it was called, during World War I, during World War II, the land that was sort of, proud of itself being the place, a heaven for people to come in. And now talking about exclusivist ways of, people and this and that and us and we. Again, the thing comes in that a nation or a people or a person who forsakes his founding ethics, the founding principles, they are principles, our constitution is very beautiful in that way that it's a blend of a flexible constitution and a rigid constitution. So there are certain provisions of the constitution that are rigid. You cannot amend them, specifically talking about articles, dealing with center-state relation, chapter 1 of part 11,
Sure.
or chapter 4 of part 5 and chapter 5 of part 6 that deals with center judiciary and state judiciary, article 241, high court for the UTs, and of course the constitutional amendment article of 368. So there are certain rigid provisions, you cannot amend them, but there are certain provisions that you can amend very easily. There has to be a mixture of rigidity and flexibility. The mixer has to be there. Unless and until you don't have the mixture, you cannot sort of adapt yourself to the changing scenario. So we have to stick to certain founding principles, but also at the same time adapting ourselves to changing circumstances and situations without forsaking those founding principles. Jab wahi khatam to hum khatam.
Right.
That is a mistake most empires do or did. That is a mistake most of the kingdoms did. That is a mistake most of us do, and we as humans are bound to make mistakes over and over again, because those who don't learn from the past are doomed to repeat it, as they say.
Yeah. I think I've only gotten like a couple of questions deep. I have a couple more because clearly this is going to be an ongoing conversation. There's so much to talk about, but I have a question. How did the ancients, say Egyptians and Indians, take that as an example, saw life and death differently or similarly? What is the ancient conception of life and death, and how does it differ across India and Egypt?
Well, let's come to India first, because it's a known entity for many of the viewers as well as for many of the people. India has always had the conception of rebirth, as they say, Purna Janam. So you are actually caught up in a circle of birth and rebirth until and unless you attain moksha. And then there are different philosophical schools dealing with different ways of attaining those moksha. So for the Astika school of philosophy, the 6 schools of Astic philosophy, it is actually gaining of knowledge, karma, reduction of bad karma, gaining good karma, the punya and the pap thing, for you to gain moksha. For the Jainas, it's kaivalya. Kaivalya is actually the state of bliss that happens when you are able to sort of subdue your senses. You have sort of followed the 5 Mahabharata, that the 5 elements of the faith, and then you attain kaivalya, that is inert bliss. Buddhism, it's nirvana. When you extinguish your ego, because Buddhists don't believe in a soul, especially talking about the Theravadan tradition of Buddhism, the early Buddhist Pali canon. It is anicca and anatta. So the universe is non-existing, so it's actually soulless. And anicca, it's just
impermanent.
It's actually for a very short time.
Yeah.
It's not eternal.
Impermanent.
Yes. Jainas ke liye the universe is eternal and everlasting. There's always a cycle happening, but then this idea of transmigration occurs for the first time in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad.
What is the transmigration?
Transmigration, the concept of birth and rebirth.
Oh, fair.
That is in the Upanishadic tradition. Even you find some of that references in the Aranyak. That is actually a corpus of texts that are a part of the Vedas, the Vedic Samhitas, but you find most of that prominent, the concept of birth and rebirth in the Upanishads. So you have Nachiketa asking questions to Yam, at what happens after death, where should I go, where should one go, what is the right course of action in the Kathopanishad, the difference between Pri and Shreya, something that is beloved and something that is beneficial for you in the long term. So different ways of understanding transmigration, moksha and things like that. Before that, we really don't have a concept of
life after death.
No, the cycle of birth and rebirth.
So we don't have birth and rebirth in the dharmic karmic sense before the Upanishads.
Before the Upanishads, most of, like, if I can extend it even before the Upanishads, the Aranyaks.
The Aranyaks, which are part of the Veda Samhita.
Yes, which are a part of the Vedic corpus.
So they are, and the Vedas are probably the first.
The Samhitas, yes, the first one.
So it's pretty much as far as the Vedas extend the concept.
It was a later innovation.
Oh, it's a later innovation on the Vedas.
In philosophy.
Right.
In the Vedas, we really don't know what was their conception about life after death. For them, it's very different from what we can actually sort of think about. For them, it was like, there is, and it has much consonance with the ancient Persian conception of life after death. That is, there's a soul that resides in an underworld, clayey, muddy world after death. That is also something we find among the Jews called Sheol. And you do find much of that in the Avestan texts of ancient Iran, having strong consonance with the Rig Veda and the Vedic texts, the early Vedic texts. And Rig Veda may be Mandal number 2 to 7 are actually older than the other books. That's number 1, number 8, and number 9, number 10. Number 2 to 7 are called the Gotra books of the Rig Veda. So each of these books were composed by either the sage and his family. So number 2 is composed by Grihad Samad. Number 3 is composed by Vishwamitra and his descendants. Number 4 was composed by Vamdev and his descendants. Number 5 was composed by Atri, then Bharadwaj, number 6, and then number 7 was composed by Vashishtha and his descendants. So these are the older parts of the Rig Veda. So most of the hymns or the mantras that we have actually have their own chronological connotations and meanings even within a single text in India.
Yes. Please finish.
And in Egypt, it's a different saga.
Before you move on to Egypt,
Yes.
because you mentioned the Persians, very interesting. I read this
The ancient Persians, the Zoroastrians.
The Zoroastrians, right.
Yes.
I've heard of this and I've noticed this in form also. I don't know if it's true. There seems to be an interaction between the sort of Vedic civilization and ancient Persian civilization in the sense that they have Ahura, we have Asura, and then if you flip it, we have Devas,
Yes.
and they have Devas.
The Hindu becomes the Sapta Sindhu, the Hom becomes the Som. Yes, lot of that.
So there is a lot of interaction there, right?
Yes. And I think that the closest cousin to Vedic Sanskrit, even Sanskrit is of two types. Sanskrit is not a single language. The language of the Rig Veda, or let's say the Vedic text itself, is very different from the Sanskrit of Kalidas and Bharavi and Magh and all those people. So you have a classical Sanskrit that succeeds a Vedic Sanskrit.
Wow.
And that Vedic Sanskrit...
How different are they?
Well, not very different, but in terms of the etymology, in terms of certain roots that they use, root verbs, in terms of certain words that comes in sort of even certain sounds that they use, little different.
Sure.
So Vedic Sanskrit has more of the sounds. Even there's a sound in Marathi, I suppose, that is written using this symbol of this infinity.
Can you ask him to
The
put it up?
the of Marathi.
How will you look that up? Marathi, just look up Marathi alphabet, also turn the
Marathi alphabet L. It's actually in Vedic Sanskrit, but not in classical Sanskrit.
Right? Somehow. I want you to try.
It's actually like the infinity sign.
I know exactly what you mean.
Yes.
It's like a L, but the L is full.
Yes.
From the bottom, yes.
So it's actually L. So it's actually in one of the first hymns of the Rig Veda, Agni Mele. So that Ire, ek Agni Ao. The Ire mein jo L hai, that is actually
This one, right?
This one, yes.
Yeah.
So agar aap dekhiye...
Looks like cherries.
Yes. So agar aap daliye Agni Sukt of Rig Veda.
Agni Sutra Rigveda.
Sukt. Sukta. Agni Suktam lyrics. Or the...
Just look up this, you'll find
Lyrics, yes. Right. So आप images डाल दो या आप...
It'd be crazy if there was वो क्या genius lyrics.
अब आप देखिए हाँ आ गया था
हाँ click कर दे.
अब आप देखिए पहले वाले को फॉलो करिए.
हाँ.
अग्नि मीड़े. अब ये ल वाला जो ल है, it is not in classical Sanskrit. अब जैसे मैं आपके सामने रिसाइट करूं without looking at that. अग्निमीड़े पुरोहितम यज्ञस्य देवमृत्विजम होतारम रत्नधातमम अग्निः पूर्वेभिर्षिभिरीड्यो नूतनैरुता सदेवाम एहे वक्षति अग्निनारैमश्नवत् पोषमेव दिवे दिवे goes on and on. So उसमें जो ल है, that is actually in Vedic Sanskrit but not in classical Sanskrit. You have certain sounds which are in Persian, ancient Persian as well as modern Persian, especially the Hamza of Arabic and Persian, the H that comes in at the last of words, which is similar to the Visarg of Sanskrit. जैसे बाला and यहाँ पर भी फारसी में खाने ही, नामे ही, रूज़ना में निगारे. The He at the last, the Hamza of Persian, actually is very similar to the Visarg of Sanskrit.
Do you by any chance have a photographic memory? Eidetic?
Well, I had underwent certain psychological tests, and I think that the person would be a better person to tell you.
Yeah, what's your IQ? Have you tested that? I'm
well,
sure your
actually,
parents
it's
got that
more
tested.
than normal, but I don't.
Yeah, more
exactly,
than normal. Sure, of
but
course.
I presume I'm a very normal child.
Yeah. What is your definition of normal? You psycho? He's like, I'm a normal child. Look at him fucking sitting here with impudence.
अच्छा, कुरान में भी अगर आप देखिए, जो classical Arabic है.
हाँ? Yeah, the mic.
So अगर आप कुरान भी देखिए, you know, उसमें भी you have the Arabic of the Quran very different from the Arabic that is being used now. For example, one of the first ayats of the Quran that was revealed as per the Islamic tradition, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Iqra, read. Bismi rabbikal lazi khalaqal insana min alaq. So read in the name of your Lord who taught the man by the pen. Taught man what he knew not. Taught man who was created from a cloud of blood. It goes on and on. So उसमें जो use है Arabic का, even the words that comes in are very different from modern Arabic. So you really cannot be sure about what this word means exactly. Wow. The interpretation is different.
Right. Go back to Egyptian concepts of life after death.
Now here comes Egyptians. The Egyptians had a very monotonous concept of life after death. It wasn't like a diverse view about whether there's a life after death. और था भी नहीं, मृत्यु था कि नहीं. It's actually something more Indian. Egyptians में there is a concept that comes in just sort of like wrapping it up in some, brief with utmost brevity. There wasn't a single soul. There were actually 3 souls. As per the ancient Egyptian, the mainstream views about life after death.
So there's 3 souls inside of me.
Yes. That's called the Ka, the Ba and the Ak. The Ka is a clone of yours. It's a clone. The exactitude of your physical appearance.
The platonic form of my physical experience.
The platonic form of your existence. That typically pertains to your physical and spatial existence. The Ba has an iconographic representation of a bird with the head of the man. That is a metaphysical, non-spatial attribution of your existence. So specifically, the soul that we talk of is the ba.
Can you look up ka?
Yeah, the ka, the ba, and the ak. The ak actually.
Show me images also. Sorry.
Oh yes. So the person's double. The ba is more spiritual. The ak is more to do with the mixture of what the ka and the ba make together. It's like a sangam, so to speak.
Right.
So as per the Egyptians, when the person dies, the ka, the ba, and the ak actually goes out. All the three, they go out of the body.
Sure.
Into different spheres of existence. So they have a wonderful around the world in 80 days tour. Unless and until they'll come back to find the body should be in a good state. Otherwise, they'll not recognize the body and hence will not enter inside the body. And you would be doomed for eternity. You will not have an afterlife. या तो उस बॉडी के साथ आप आधार कार्ड डाल दो कि भाई उसने कहा ने देखा कि हाँ फलाना नाम है, पिता का नाम ये, डेट ऑफ बर्थ ये और आधार कार्ड नंबर, फोटो भी मैच कर रही है भाई, बस थोड़ा सा वो ऐसे है और चेहरा थोड़ा सा वैसे आधार कार्ड वाले जो फोटो खींचते हैं वो भी वैसे ही फोटो खींचते हैं,
मुर्दा ही फोटो है, वो जिंदा तो है ही नहीं।
अच्छे से अच्छे दिखने वाले खूबसूरत आदमी को बदसूरत आधार कार्ड में बना दिया जाता है।
बिल्कुल भाई साहब, सही है।
या तो आप मम्मी बना दीजिए या तो आप उसकी मम्मी बना के एक सुंदर सा आप जैसे
मुखौटा बना दो,
मुखौटा बना दिया, जैसे देखिए उधर द बा इज एंटरिंग बैक इनटू द बॉडी, दैट फोटोग्राफ। यस, सो व्हेन यू मेक द मम्मी अ ब्यूटीफुल वन इंडीड and you add the charm and the glitter, the cosmetics, the goodies inside the tomb, the ba would say, yeah, this is Jannat. And it will come back into the body. And the person would be like upright. He would be coming back to life. And then starts a video game-like adventure. From your tomb, through the gates of the underworld, you have to cross rivers, demons, rivers of fire, rivers of blood, until and unless you find a place which is called the day of judgment or the hall of judgment with the taraju. With the taraju, the photo is already there. The photograph is already there. अब आप देखिए यहाँ पर क्या हो रहा है कि after the man who is dead, his name is Ani.
Where do you see it?
The man and the woman on the top, bottom, bottom left. Yes,
how do you know their name is Ani?
Well, actually, it's a part of the scroll of Ani, the book of the dead of Ani,
fair,
and his wife Tutu.
Okay, so this is Ani and Tutu.
Tutu, yes. So अब Tutu भी बाद में मरी होंगी, तो पति परमेश्वर को कैसे छोड़ सकते हैं, तो उनका भी साथ में जजमेंट हो रहा है. So Ani is a dead man, and after crossing over, like the Egyptian Book of the Dead is like a manual, how to cross these Mario game adventures through the underworld to reach this hall. So that hall actually
go back
signifies the judgment of the gods. When your soul, which resides in the heart, is actually balanced against a feather of truth.
Yeah, I can see it.
Yes.
Yeah, zoom in again. So the heart is on the left side.
The heart is on the left side because for the Egyptians,
can you zoom in on the heart also?
The brain wasn't a very useful entity. And you know, it's a very gruesome process, was something my favorite. During the mummification process, so mummy was made for the ba to come back, for enabling the ba to come back. So body अच्छी होगी तभी ba enter करेगा and you would be granted an afterlife. For them, the brain was a cushion. So they would remove the brain through the nostrils.
Wait, they thought the brain is just a cushion?
Is a cushion.
For the skull?
For the skull.
Wow.
So गर्मी से बचाने के लिए.
Makes so much sense though.
Yes. So Egyptians के लिए it was a useless entity and वो सड़ता भी है बहुत जल्दी. Brain is like
right.
So they used a hook, a long one, curved hook, poke it into through your nose. Then there's an ethmoid bone here in the nasal cavity, the nasal chamber. Trit, poken in the hook, churn it around like a lassi chas. The whole brain is churned up, literally. As we say ना, दिमाग
की दही बन
गई तो literally the Egyptians बनाते थे.
Damn,
and then the body is turned upside down to the other side, tuck, and the whole brain would come out in a semi-liquid form. Very, like my best part, my actually perfect favorite part. And then, for them, the heart was the seat of intelligence.
That's so interesting.
And the only organ that was kept, or that rather was allowed to be kept inside the body after the mummification.
So like the kidneys, whatever, would have been taken out.
And they were taken out and they were poured into certain jars called canopic jars. So you have 4 jars, Kebesenuf, Daumutef, these are the names of the 4 gods who are guardians of the 4 viscera: the intestine, the stomach, the liver, and the lungs.
Okay.
So they were also kept along with the dead person in his tomb. The heart was left inside, but it was the heart that was weighed against a feather of truth called the feather of Math. अगर ये बैलेंस कर गया, he would be granted an afterlife. तो कहते हैं ना, दिल भारी हो रहा है पापों से, इसलिए संगम में स्नान करने आइए. बिकॉज जब आप संगम में स्नान करेंगे या इजिप्शियंस के हिसाब से आप रहेंगे, आपका दिल हल्का हो जाएगा. So it can balance against the feather of truth, and the person can enjoy eternity. If not, and that demon who stands there, whose name is Amit, yes, half crocodile, half lion, half hippo,
Yep.
he would devour on your heart and you are no more. Because it's the heart that is everything that you have, the motherboard of any human being.
Very interesting.
And then you have a tribunal of the gods sitting up there. Yes, Ra, the sun god. Then his
Set.
name is Atum. And it's actually Atum,
Okay. This
the
is
creator
Arthur.
god.
Okay.
Then the Math goddess herself, the goddess of truth. Then Sekhmet. So you have actually the names of all the gods in hieroglyphs, and just read it and cannot forget reading them. And then you have other deities. Now the 2 sisters who are sitting there, if you can just
Right.
yeah, the
Isis and-
nahi, unse pehle, to the right. Yes.
Huh.
Yes. The 2 sisters, you can see they are 2 people sitting side by side. Actually, it's Isis and Nephthys.
Yes, that's what I thought.
And then down there is Anubis.
That is Anubis. Is that Horus?
No, it's Thought.
In front of Amit.
Amit is actually the god of learning and
Oh, yes.
So this is the entire Egyptian conception of afterlife.
Wow.
It's a Mario game adventure,
Yeah.
PS6, and something that the manual that you need for that is actually the Egyptian Book of the Dead you find across in tombs of the wealthy, of course. So even there is a sort of rich versus poor divide in the afterlife. So the poor are damned for eternity. They cannot afford to have an afterlife because they cannot get themselves mummified. The rich are okay, so they can actually prefer to die in peace. And for an ancient Egyptian, death was a beginning. It was, and it is, something for them. They planned things in advance, including their tombs. What would be kept with them inside the tombs? What would be kept? Who would go with them inside the tomb? As in their pets, their animals. They were also mummified and kept in. जब master की death हुई, so the body of the pet would also accompany the mummy of the master.
It's like an ancient Black Mirror
world.
episode.
Yes,
Right?
Sort of.
It's
sort
like
of,
an ancient
sort
Black
of,
Mirror
sort
episode.
of.
Bro, when I have conversations of this nature, there comes a point where my mind just stops accommodating information and I go into inappropriate joke territory. And I'm soon hitting that
And I
place
love it.
where I can just think of jokes and like I cannot think. And I know this. I'm actually very self-aware about this.
Yes.
This happens when my girlfriend is trying to, or my fiance is trying to talk to me about important stuff as well. I enter into inappropriate joke territory because my mind's
So
full.
diverting the way.
You can see
Yes,
as it's
yeah.
happening.
You know, there's another Latin verse for that. We use it in law, and even the same goes for here, the same goes for that, and especially for dealing with girlfriends. Nemo debit vixari pro uno iatum causa.
Right.
A man should not be vexed twice for the same crime.
Right. You can't try a man twice for the same crime. Yes.
Like, अगर मैं आपसे या आपको लोकल नहीं ले जा पाया द खान एज प्रॉमिस बिकॉज आई हैड अ मीटिंग एंड आपने उस दिन डांट दिया हमें, उसको 1 महीने बाद क्यों याद दिलाने की जरूरत है?
Right.
So even the law agrees that a man shouldn't be punished for more than once. Nemo debit vixari pro uno iatum causa.
Right.
Even इनके यहाँ भी है, भाई हार्ट दे दो, खत्म,
दोबारा मत मांगना.
दोबारा मत बोलना कि अब तुमने ये पाप किया वो पाप किया, दिल को दुख होता है.
Before we wrap this up, and hopefully we have several more because I think we can go on for hours, bro. I'm not joking. Apart from this is a compute limitation in my own software. I think you have so much to offer in a conversation. But before I wrap this up, is there a question you have for me?
Well,
You're not forced to, by the way. You can say no.
not at all,
Okay,
not
okay,
at all.
yeah.
Well, the thing is that it's such a pleasure being a part of the podcast, and of course, I didn't even had the hint while being into the podcast that it's a podcast going on. It was more of a sensation that we are going back into times immemorial of sort of discerning the men and the women, and of course the third gender, who were a part and parcel of the ancient processes of knowledge accumulation, generation, creation, and of course transfers. Now it is for us to decide whether we have to appreciate this composite heritage of our ancestors and make it available for the future generations and appreciate it, or rather just be a dumb little fellow looking at it and not appreciating it enough. So of course, Thank you so much for having me.
Hey, brother.
It has been a pleasure, a wonderful evening indeed. Thank you so much.
I'm super glad, man. I'm super glad you've enjoyed this. And I swear to God, you're such a smart kid. I think there's so many people who should be talking to you. You should be in our circuits more. And you'll be here again very soon. I'll be more than happy to host you.
Thank you so much.
Man.
Thank you.
This has been an absolute pleasure.
Pleasure indeed. Pleasure indeed.